and Chief Purpose Officer of Kohl Collective, which is a growth accelerator that works with leadership teams to develop purpose-led business strategy and to implement that strategy through innovation in the customer experience. Speaking to us today on how purpose-led companies are leading the way, please welcome Ty Montague.
Thank you so much, Alicia. And everybody, it's so nice to be here with you today. All right, so it's, as I said, wonderful to be here with all of you today. And I want to start off by asking a simple question. How are you feeling? And I want to ask you to really pause and reflect on that question. How are you feeling today? How are you feeling about your life? How are you feeling about the community that you live in? How are you feeling about our country? How are you feeling about the world these days and the directions that it is taking you? How do you feel about the future? And as I was putting this presentation together and reflecting on that question myself, I have to say, I'm feeling a little anxious these days. And it's a little bit hard to put my finger on exactly why I'm feeling anxious. I mean, the headlines are quite enough: wildfires in the West and war in Eastern Europe and mass shootings and the ongoing political turmoil both here and elsewhere, the stock market and the crypto market and monkeypox. Like, really? But beyond all of that, there's something underneath that just seems off to me. And I wish I was with all of you. I wish I could ask for a show of hands, but I am guessing that I am not alone in that feeling this morning. In fact, I know I'm not alone because I've looked at the data, and the data shows that all of us are experiencing some really big changes in how we think about things and how we feel about them. So over the past 20 years, we've been experiencing let's call it a crisis of trust. And this is happening globally. People are losing faith in the institutions which used to comprise like what I would think of as a functioning society. Trust in the government down 34%. Trust in the media down 15%. Trust in religion, and this is all religions globally, down 24%. And this trust crisis has been well reported. But there are some things that I discovered as I dug into this that surprised me. So 67% of us believe that journalists are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things that they know are false or are gross exaggerations. 66% believe that's true of government leaders, and business leaders don't get a pass here either. 63% of us think that business leaders are trying to deceive us. And if you dig down a little bit, the numbers don't get much better when you dig into young people. Only half of millennials would say that they trust companies, and even fewer from Gen Z, Gen Zennials, said that they trust companies. And both of those statistics are headed down and are down sharply since 2018. This got my attention. 59% of millennials and Gen Zennials say that they are more fearful about the country's future. And this lack of trust in institutions that has been compounded, obviously, by the global pandemic and amplified and by the destabilizing power that we're learning about just lately of social media, is leading, I think, to another growing pandemic, which is our friend anxiety, that has been on the rise for at least a decade, but during the pandemic spiked, jumped from 8.5% to 37.2%. And its doppelganger, and perhaps not surprisingly, depression among adults in the United States also tripled. 1 in every 3 American adults describes themselves as grappling with depression, which is crazy high. And I'm really sorry to get so real so early in the day. And I promise we were going to pivot to brighter topics momentarily. But one more statistic that I thought I'm concerned about, I think all of us should be concerned about, is that all of this uncertainty and chaos in the world is causing people, especially young people, to really begin to question capitalism itself. Young people around the world seem to be questioning whether it's a sustainable system, and whether it's a system that has their backs. 50% of millennials and Gen Zennials say they reject capitalism, which I find extraordinary. And if you look at, the global numbers, for instance, 67% of the younger cohort, Gen Z in the UK, overtly prefer the idea of socialism to capitalism. And, they seem to be questioning that if capitalism, as currently practiced, is something they need to reform or just, toss. And they are becoming increasingly activist about this and beginning to demand real change. And they're demanding change not just from governments, but also from business leaders, which means that the environment for business leaders is changing quickly. Like back in the day, if someone asked you to publicly comment, and you were a founder or a CEO, and somebody asked you to publicly comment on social, environmental, or religious issues, your job was to zip it. Don't go there. Like, don't talk about that stuff. That's the third rail. But not anymore. There are new rules for business leaders in the world today. So, excuse me, 90% of Gen Z thinks that companies have an obligation to solve environmental and societal problems. 81% believe that CEOs should be visibly active on social or environmental issues. And 60% of young people would choose where to work based on the CEO's willingness to take a stand on issues that they really care about. This is a huge change. And at the very least, if you want to win the war for the next generation of talent, have a point of view and express it. And for a lot of business leaders, this environment is disorienting because this is all so new, right? And this is the point in the presentation where I hope that you start to hear the Rocky music, because this is also, I think, really liberating for business leaders. This is a time now when you have the right, in fact, you have the responsibility to have an authentic point of view about everything in the world, and to express your point of view. And for anybody who doesn't get the Rocky reference, it's a movie that was made like 100 years ago in the 80s. Look it up. But we digress. The point I want to make here is this is where I begin to see some hope, or actually beyond hope. Like this genuinely makes me excited because we are now seeing companies beginning to respond to this new environment. So we see companies like Dick's Sports taking a stand on guns by discontinuing the sale of assault rifles and moving to phase out all guns completely. We see companies like Patagonia living out their purpose, which is to save our home planet, literally. They're pursuing their purpose by suing the government to protect wild and open spaces. And they're also making it super clear where they stand politically by sometimes, for instance, sewing labels in their product that say, vote the assholes out. So we see companies like Ben and Jerry's taking on social injustice issues. And we even see, formerly exploitative institutions like or maybe even currently exploitative institutions like the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue getting the memo on body positivity. And I think because of all this, it begins to feed on itself. And we are now seeing a new generation of entrepreneurs who are creating companies designed from the beginning to benefit multiple stakeholders rather than the old school version of a company, which was designed to benefit and enrich shareholders alone. These companies that are often called purpose-led companies are righting some of the wrongs of old school capitalism. They're taking on social injustice, they're taking on racism, they're taking on sexism, they're taking on the environmental issues that we face, like climate change, and some of the existential issues that we face as we contemplate a population that is on track to hit 10 billion by 2050. So, like, how are we going to feed everybody without creating even further degradation of the biosphere? These are the hard questions. And as capitalism responds to these challenges, what we're seeing is just massive amounts of money shifting into this new form of capitalism, what's often termed conscious capitalism. So in 2020, $51 billion were invested in conscious capitalist companies. In 2021, that number almost tripled to $121 billion. And right now, the space is on a track over the next 20 years to attract $50 trillion in investment. And so, not surprisingly, we see a new generation of entrepreneurs like you rising to this challenge, building companies that are taking on the issues of our time and creating real value and real accountability. So let's just talk about a handful of them. We see, companies like Chief taking on the patriarchy and creating a female-founded and led members-only organization that is pursuing the purpose of creating the most powerful community of female leaders, literally blowing up the boardroom. Maybe not literally blowing up the boardroom, figuratively blowing up the boardroom. Founders Lindsay Kaplan and Carolyn Childers are out to change the ratio of women in leadership positions throughout corporate America. And today, Chief members include leaders and aspiring leaders across the spectrum of business, big businesses, mid-sized businesses, startups, and have formed a really powerful community. And this community is routinely nourished and inspired by bringing in leaders, iconic leaders from the outside that give salons and talks, including people like Michelle Obama. So let's see how Chief is doing as a business. Pretty well, it turns out. Membership more than doubled over the past year to 10,000 female leaders, more than 40,000 women on the waiting list at Chief. They raised a total of $140 million so far, and their last raise was at a valuation of $1.1 billion. And they've only been in business for 3 years. So this is a company that's doing extraordinarily, doing good and doing extraordinarily well. We see companies like Allbirds taking on climate change by disrupting the sneaker industry. Now, your average Nike is made almost 100% from excuse me, petroleum-based plastic, incredibly carbon intensive and non-recyclable. So Tim Brown, who was a professional soccer player from New Zealand, had an idea to make an uber comfortable sneaker from natural materials. And he teamed up with a materials scientist named Joey Zwillinger, and the two of them launched Allbirds in 2016 around the purpose of making better things in a better way. So making better things means better for you because the shoes are incredibly comfortable. And a better way means better for the planet because Allbirds products are made from completely natural materials. The uppers are made, the foam in the sole is made from sugarcane. The uppers are made from wool. And in some cases, they're made from tree bark. And that sounds awful. I get it. Why would you want to wear a shoe made out of tree bark? But you got to try these shoes out. I own my first pair because as a part of my podcast, I interviewed Joey, and the shoes are incredible and amazingly comfortable. Allbirds is also proof that making better things in a better way is better business. So you look at their results, they've sold 80 million pairs of shoes in 6 years. Their net revenue came in at $219 million in 2020, which is up 73% year on year. And at their IPO, which was pretty recently, they were valued at $4.1 billion. So once again, proof that, you know, they are doing well and doing good. Food is another huge area of innovation for purpose-led businesses. Russell Diaz-Canseco, the CEO of Vital Farms, is pursuing the purpose of improving the lives of people, animals, and the planet through food. And they're taking on the industrial approach to egg production by creating what they call bullshit-free eggs. And to accomplish this, they've actually created a new standard for their whole industry called pasture-raised. Now, pasture-raised hens get an average of 118 square feet of actual outdoor space to forage in versus the 1 square foot on average that are given to a free range or a cage-free hen. And so, maybe not surprisingly, the eggs taste better and are better for you as a result. And for Vital Farms, eggs are just the beginning. Pursuing their purpose has now gotten them into the butter business, and I'm sure that's just the beginning for them. And let's take a look at, hold on. Let's take a look at their business results. In 2021, they hit 600 million in revenue. They are now the #1 pasture-raised egg brand. Although they've spawned, having created that standard, there are now many companies pursuing that standard. So they've created a new category. And they've become the #2 overall egg brand in the US. So really giving the industrial kind of the bad old way a run for its money, which is great to see. And I want to draw your attention to the fact that all of these companies share some really important attributes. They all have defined a big problem in the world that they want to take on. And their business model is actually aligned with them achieving that purpose. So in other words, the more success that they have from a business standpoint, the more the problem that they've taken on is getting solved. And last, they all make sure that remuneration is tied to results outside of financial results. In other words, results relating to their purpose as well as to their financial obligations. So these are stakeholder-led companies, not just shareholder-led companies, which is an important distinction for entrepreneurs moving forward. And just one point I wanted to make is that lest you think I just cherry picked a handful of like specific standout winners here, here are some general statistics about the whole space. And I'm just going to let you read these statistics on your own. But I really remain incredibly optimistic in the face of all the challenges that I began this presentation with. And you may wonder why, but it's because of all of you. It's because of entrepreneurs, because this is what you do, right? You find a problem in the world and you launch a business that solves that problem. And if you pick, if you choose to start a purpose-led business, if you pick a social or environmental problem that you want to take on, what you will wind up doing is creating a more just and more verdant world for all of us. And so the other thing I know about you as entrepreneurs is that you are people of action. And so to wrap up today, I want to leave you with 5 tangible actions that you can take to build a purpose-led business of your own. So first of all, first thing you need to do is define the problem that you want to take on. Sometimes we think of it as defining, at my company, we think of it as defining your enemy. What is the dragon that you are setting out to slay? And it needs to be personal. You need to really believe in this problem, that this problem needs to be solved, because this becomes the driving force and inspiration for you and your whole business, your employees and your customers. The second action is make sure that your business model and your purpose are aligned. I touched on this a little bit earlier. The more your product or service that you sell, the better off the world should be. So going back to Allbirds, like if you make a better sneaker, right? One that helps solve the problem of carbon, then the more Nikes you replace on people's feet, the better off we all are. That alignment between purpose and business model is really important. The third action is define key actions that bring your purpose to life, both internally and externally. Actions that make it real for people. So what are the actions that you want to take that will make it really clear that you really mean this? Sometimes we call these iconic actions. So for Vital Farms, defining a new legal standard in your category, pasture raised, was the way that they did it, and it created immediate notoriety and an immediate connection for them. What you want to be thinking about here is giving the world proof that you really mean what you say through this action. And that's how you build trust and rebuild trust, I think, more importantly. So fourth action is set ambitious goals, but also be transparent about problems that you encounter along the way. Being purpose-led does not mean being perfect. Nobody expects you to be perfect. Set really ambitious goals for yourself and your company. In some cases, goals that you don't know how you're going to achieve. And if they're ambitious enough, you're not going to achieve some of them. You'll also encounter unexpected problems along the way, right? All entrepreneurs do. The key with being purpose-led is don't hide your problems. Don't try to pretend that everything is fine. Share your problems. The fact is that because the harder and more ambitious the problem is that you're trying to take on, the more inspiration people will feel in watching you do it. So being honest when you encounter problems will actually increase their loyalty to you. And then last, hold yourself and your team accountable with goals and metrics. Tie remuneration in your company to meeting some of your purpose-led goals, as well as just the money goals. You have to have money goals. You have to have money, and profit makes a company sustainable. But at the leadership level and throughout your company, measurement creates culture. If you say you're purpose-led, but all you really measure is your financial results, you'll lose credibility. So define all the stakeholders in your business, including your employees, your customers, the planet, the communities that you do business in, and define some metrics against all of them. It takes a little bit extra time, but it pays off in multiple ways. And for some extra credit, for those who are super ambitious, have a listen to our podcast. It's called Calling Bullshit, and it's the first podcast about purpose washing. It's about companies that claim to be purpose-led, but in some cases maybe aren't, and in some cases definitely aren't, to be honest. We built it, though, to be a resource for purpose-led entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs to hear stories about what's working and what's not working in the space. And so in season 1, you'll hear some positive stories. You'll hear more about Vital Farms and about Allbirds. And you'll also hear about stories about companies that claim to be purpose-led who are definitely not getting it right, and unfortunately adding to the trust crisis that I mentioned at the beginning. It's available on iHeart. It's available on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcasts. So give it a listen. And I want to close today with one final question. How are you feeling now? I'll just share with you that I'm feeling a little better. I hope you are too. It's always great to spend time with people who are trying to make positive change in the world. And we all got to stick together. We can't cure like all the world's ills overnight, but we can take on enough of them to make a huge, huge difference. So I want to thank you for your time today, and let's get to work.
Oh, Ty, thank you so much. I have to say to you that I am feeling so much better as a result of your presentation. Thank you. I really appreciate that, and I know that our audience will as well. I'm just looking in the chat to see if there are any questions. Somebody commented that the shoes that you mentioned sound great, and they're going to get some today.
Excellent.
I'll wear them. Yeah, excellent. But certainly, you know, I've learnt a hell of a lot, and all that, and I do know the Rocky music.
Good to know, Alicia. Thank you very much. It was great to meet you, and thank you all for listening today.
Thank you so much, Ty, and I look forward to listening to your podcast, Calling Bullshit, very, very soon. Thank you so much for joining Leading Entrepreneurs of the World.
Cheers.